Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg,
Shalom,
and Rabbi Morty Jesus.
Shalom.
Thank you to our generous sponsors this week, Dasi and Jeremy Schwalbe family, who are sponsoring this episode of the One Pasuk podcast in celebration of Rabbi Daniel and Dina Goldberg's new daughter, Sarit Leora. May the Goldbergs and our community see her raised together with her siblings, Moshe, Shaya, and Esther, to Torah, Chuppah, and Masim Tovim. Thank you so much to Dasi and Jeremy Schwalbe for your generous support of the One Pasuk podcast. Anyone interested in sponsoring a future episode, please reach out to us at the show. All right, here we go.
You open your door to tired men, to lonely passers-by, and angels from heaven. Your kindness and your care were known far and wide. Father of a nation, your soul is alive.
Before we get to our One Pasuk, we'd like to welcome our guest for this podcast, a very special guest, Englewood's own Rabbi Zev Reichman of the East Hill Synagogue. We're so grateful to you for joining us. Rabbi Reichman, as everyone knows, is a Mayan HaMisgaber, an ever-increasing fountain of Torah and inspiration. Rabbi Reichman is known not just for his leadership of the shul, his teaching and leadership in YU and teaching in many different places, but particularly is known for his passion for Hasidus. So I'm very curious to hear what Rabbi Reichman is going to add to this podcast. But
Rabbi, you just boxed him in, Rabbi. What if he has a nice Litvish of art? He's got to change it.
I know. But knowing Rabbi Reichman, he knows how to roll with it.
Okay.
But before we get started, because we have you here, I had a question that I was thinking about specifically for you because I wanted to hear your feedback on this. We're living in an era in Jewish history in which the boundaries between different segments of the frum community are much less rigid. Hasidim versus Misnagdim, Sfarad versus Ashkenaz. Many people, you don't have those conflicts, you don't have those differences as much, and you have many Jews who draw from the different traditions and see themselves as connecting with different parts of the community. Even, I would say, even those who are Zionistic versus those who are non-Zionistic. I think the lines between those are blurred today. And so I was wondering, Rabbi Reichman, if someone were to ask you for guidance, how to find their place across this spectrum of the frum community, what would you tell them?
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for doing this podcast and spreading Torah through all these wonderful new ways. I think that it's a blessing that Baruch Hashem, through modern communications and transportation and interactions and kibbutz galios in the land of Israel, that different communities are learning from each other and gaining from each other. And I would argue that a person should look for sincerity. If you find a very sincere teacher of Musar, of Hasidus, of Avas Yisrael, nationalism, try to learn from that person. And I think that everybody will find that there's so much that each tradition has to give, and there's a lot that we can all learn from all of them.
I love that answer, Rabbi Kalish. He often says the Gemara says that in the time of the coming of Mashiach, chutzpah yazgeh, there's going to be a proliferation of chutzpah. There's many different interpretations of what it means that the youth are going to have this element of chutzpah, of brazenness. He says over that the chutzpah means that people are going to have such a desire for truth, they're going to ignore everything around them. So whatever it was, I'm in a community that is, a Litvish community, let's say, and they only learn certain sifarim and they only believe in certain ways of serving Hashem. Because I gravitate towards something else, divrei hasidut, other ideas, if it's not true, if it doesn't resonate, I have no part in it, but I will seek and search and find the truth and find something that really resonates with me. And he says that's what it means, chutzpah yazgeh. These youth are going to be constantly just be searching and finding where they could assert themselves, and they're going to buck the trends. What the environment that they were boxed into is going to be something that they're no longer beholden to, and they're going to find their way of serving Hashem. And that idea of sincerity in particular is really essentially the same idea.
Our pasuk for this week, Parshas Vayera, comes from the very beginning of the Parsha. Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei mamrei, Hashem appeared to him, to Avraham, in Elonei Mamre. V'hu yoshev Pesach ha'ohel kechom hayom. He was sitting at the entrance of his tent at the heat of the day. We know this is a famous moment in the life of Avraham. Immediately after he has his bris milah, the rabbis tell us he's recovering, and he has this divine revelation, this appearance of Hashem, which then leads into the arrival of these three individuals who are perhaps angels. But this is a seminal moment in the life of Avraham. Rabbi Reichman, would you kick us off, please?
Oh, my pleasure. There are many points to say about this pasuk, many ideas, but to share one thought that I heard from my teacher of Moshe Wolfson, Zechrono Livracha. Rashi says, why did the Torah emphasize that Hashem appeared to Avraham be'elonei Mamre, on the plains of Mamre? Rashi says, Hu shenasan lo eitza ala milah. Mamre advised Avraham about bris milah. And this is something which is hard to understand. What was the advice that Avram looked for from Mamre about bris milah? And so suggested Rav Wolfson, Mamre understood that if Avram would perform bris milah, that would transform Avram Avinu. He would become an elevated person. Asher kitchanu b'mitzvosav, Rabbi Yerucham Levavit said, Hashem commanded us with mitzvos, and they sanctify us. Our body changes because of the mitzvos that we do. The Mishnah says in Olos, 248 mitzvos saseh, 248 Rashi Yevarim, 248 limbs. Every mitzvah that a Jew does sanctifies a limb of the Jew. Jews have a different body than the rest of the world. And the symbol of that is bris milah, totally different being. And so here Mamre wasn't Jewish. He wasn't going to do bris milah. And Avram says to Mamre, if I do bris milah, will we be disconnected? Mamre said, yes, we will be disconnected. The spiritual guidance that I used to get from you, I'm not going to be able to get anymore because you'll be in a whole different category. But even so, do it. Because serving Hashem doesn't only entail a willingness to do whatever Hashem asks of us, which is physically hard. Even if something is spiritually hard, that's part of serving Hashem. Serving Hashem is Mesirus Nefesh Ruchni, to sacrifice spirituality. Mamre said, having you uncircumcised makes me more connected to you. If you'll be circumcised, you're going to be transformed. You'll be a whole different nation. I won't have the same connection, and still do it, because Hashem told you to do it. If Hashem tells you to do something, you do it, even if there's a spiritual cost. That's the meaning of Hu shenasan lo eitza ala milah. Hashem said, if Mamre is willing to give up his own spirituality for the fulfillment of my command, I will appear to Avram in Mamre's place. When you're willing to give up spirituality, Hashem actually gives you a gift of revelation of spirituality. And this reminds me of a thought that I heard at the funeral of Rabbi Shlomo Kalbach, who passed away right around Parshas Vayera, where he said the pasuk begins with Vayera Elav Hashem, not Vayera Hashem al Avram, Vayera Elav Hashem. Hashem appeared to him. It was the deepest possible appearance, the deepest possible connection. Avram was on the highest level he had ever reached. Look at the Medrash that talks about this. And what did he see? He saw three earth worshippers. And he says to God, I'm going to give away this greatest revelation to go welcome three earth worshippers. Service of Hashem entails a willingness to give away heights of spirituality to serve Hashem. And ultimately, we then are rewarded with more spirituality.
I think that's such a powerful idea. And I find myself just wanting to take your idea and just apply it to this situation, that situation. But I'm curious to hear from you. Can you give us like an example that would resonate with people, what it means to
use yourself as an example? Being a Rav. Your whole life, you're in yeshiva, you have this idyllic existence where you just get to learn and learn more and learn more. And suddenly you make the choice to go out and inspire others. And suddenly all of their issues become your issues, and you have far less time to focus on your davening. I remember the first year that I was a rabbi, it was terribly difficult to daven Shemona Esrei. I was constantly thinking, am I davening too long? Are they waiting for me? If they're waiting for me, it's not nice. So I couldn't concentrate. But after a while, you realize that Hashem affords us opportunities in the capacity in which we are, even though we're making a certain level of sacrifice. But the Kihila raises us up through all the interactions we have with them. It's another form of growth, but in the strict sense of the word, we're no longer in Kolel, we're no longer in yeshiva, we don't have possibly the same luxury of dedicating ourselves exclusively to the pursuit of Avodat Hashem.
It reminds me of the story of the crying baby. I always forget which of the
think the
Lubavitch
Balatanya.
rabbis. It was the Balatanya. Can you tell us the story?
Well, it's a famous story. I think Rav Amital used to like to relate that story, and he related it when Gush was first dedicated. I think the story was that the Balatanya was in the sukkah learning, and his son-in-law, the Mitzvah Rebbe, was also there learning, and his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, was crying. And baby woke up and started to cry, and they're learning late at night in the sukkah. And the Mitzvah Rebbe was still learning. And the Balatanya said, but there's a baby crying. And the Mitzvah Rebbe said, I didn't hear. And the Balatanya said, if you don't hear a baby crying while learning, maybe there's something wrong with the learning. And the idea being that, as Rav Amital took it, it's very, very important to learn and to grow and to serve Hashem. But we also have to have very big windows and see the nation crying and the needs of the nation, and know that if we don't know how to close a Gemara to fulfill a mitzvah, to do something that no one else can do, then even when our Gemara is open, it's really closed.
I was also going to discuss this aspect of the Pasuk and Rashi, and just how astonishing it is that Avraham would seek counsel. What possible question is there when Hashem commands you to undergo bris milah? And I thought, and it kind of takes us full circle, kind of back into where we moved through that story. It strikes me that sometimes you know the right answer. Sometimes you have Abraham was absolutely convinced he was, of course, going to undergo bris milah, but there's still a value in bringing other people into the process and having those discussions and kind of operating in a way that's aware of the world around you, like with the big windows. Like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm of course going to listen to the command of the Ribono Shel Olam, but I don't want it to just be me alone doing this and cutting myself off from the world. I'm going to do it, but let me try to fold more people into this process, and let me do it in a way that engages people and builds bridges rather than in a way that severs those bridges, right? Like it was never a question of whether Abraham would do it, but just about the process of getting there in a way that doesn't isolate him and cut him off from the world. So that's how I was thinking about this rather remarkable medrash. I think it's slightly different then, but maybe adjacent to, and in a certain way complementary to the idea that you shared, Rabbi Reichman.
And it's on brand for Abraham, because the way we view Abraham is that Abraham is somebody who wants to draw more people in. He puts himself out there. But what it really reminded me of, it seems to be modeling the Kadosh Baruch Hu himself, who, when he created humanity, he said, Naaseh Adam b'tzalmenu. He consulted his heavenly court, as it were. And so it's the very same concept.
I was going to turn your attention to the end of the Pasuk. The Pasuk says that God appeared to Abraham in the plains of Mamre, and he was sitting kehom hayom, in the heat of the day. Rashi says, Hotzia Kadosh Baruch Hu hamam ein artika. Hashem removed the sun from his sheath. And it's remarkable because we tend to think that Abraham is known as the Isha Hesed. He's the quintessential Baal Hesed that really personifies who he is as a person. And you would imagine that if there's no need for Chesed, Abraham shouldn't be so disturbed. The fact is, it's 100-something degrees outside. Nobody's traveling. If nobody's traveling, essentially nobody needs anything. If nobody needs anything, Abraham, there's no need for your Chesed. So why are you so disturbed? And I think to become known as the Isha Hesed, to be personified by the very act of Hesed, you have to understand there's another layer. There's an attitude of, if there's a need, I'll help address that need and ensure that there's no longer a need. However, Abraham saw this as an opportunity to constantly develop himself. Every act of Hesed was his ability to imitate HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And a day that would go by that there was no Hesed, it's not so much that, okay, there's a need for some sort of welfare program that's going to plug this need. No. Abraham was saying this is an opportunity day in, day out. And the fact that the sun is 100 and some odd degrees and nobody needs me, that's not an excuse. Because now I don't have the opportunity to do what it is that I so desperately seek. Because that is the ultimate Isha Hesed, is somebody who's constantly utilizing Chesed as an opportunity to do for others, not merely by way of, oh, you need me and therefore I'll fill in, but rather I constantly want to be a giver. I want to find every opportunity in which I can further build my relationship with Hashem and with others through acts of chesed. And Abraham was terribly disturbed because he realized that as the day progresses, he's not going to have the opportunity to do it. And for that very reason, Hashem miraculously sends these angels, not because they needed anything, and that's exactly why they're angels per se, because they don't need anything. But Hashem was showing Abraham, this is for you. You want to be someone who's constantly giving. Here's an opportunity to give, even though Abraham didn't necessarily know that they were angels. But here's an opportunity to give because that's who you are as a person. And Abraham was showing Hashem that I'm terribly disturbed by the reality of not being able to perform this mitzvah.
I think Michtav Meliyahu, in fact, writes in Kuntres HaChesed that there's a medrash that contrasts Eov with Avram Avinu. That Eov said, but, any guest who came by, I always helped him. And Hashem's response to Eov is, yeah, but you're not like Avram. Avram had doors in every direction. Avram put tables out with meat for people who were never accustomed to eat meat. And Rav Dessler suggests that the point that Hashem is making is that Eov would respond to needs, whereas Avram Avinu would initiate. Avram Avinu would give even when it wasn't a need. It wasn't just rachamim. It was chesed, which is the source that is constantly giving to others.
I've spoken about this in the past, and it's something that I'm constantly working on in myself. And so I'm not speaking from a place of having mastered this, but there's a big difference when someone is going through a family event or, and that they need help. A big difference between saying, let me know what I can do, versus I'm bringing you dinner tomorrow night. Would you prefer pizza or, this restaurant?
Exactly.
So it's like, let me know what I can do if I can fill a need, versus I know there's this need. I'm doing this thing for you. Help me do it in the best way possible. And it feels like that's a little bit of resonates with this, like Eov Abraham. Like Eov was like, when there was a need, I was happy to help, sincerely. But Abraham was going out there like, no, I'm doing this chesed. I'm going to do it. And it's just a matter of, finding the opportunity the right way.
Chazal noticed some awkward phrasing in this pasuk. They noticed that Avraham, or at least the reference to Avraham, Elav, it precedes the reference to Hashem. Vayera Elav Hashem. Instead of saying Hashem appeared to Avraham, it says to Avraham Hashem appeared, which is awkward, and it's not typical. More often in the Torah, we see Hashem when he's interacting with someone. It's Hashem first. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe, right? Hashem speaks to Moshe. So why is it different in this instance? What I'd like to suggest is that the life of Avraham is a template for establishing a relationship with Hashem. Every interaction, every dialogue, every event carries some lesson in how we can develop our connection to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Now, it's interesting because the Rambam teaches us in Moreh Nevuchim, and we know from many other places that Hashem is perfect and unchanging. And so if we're developing a relationship with the divine, it's up to us. It's up to the individual person to come closer to Hashem, to draw themselves closer to Hashem. The more we invest in our spiritual lives, the more we cultivate the relationship, the closer we will be to the divine. And so that's what Vayera Elav Hashem suggests, that Hashem appeared to Avraham not because Hashem was appearing to Avraham. No, Hashem appeared to Avraham because Elav, Avraham was drawing himself closer and closer to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. How do we do that? Hashem doesn't appear to us in the same way as to Avraham, but we do that very simply through studying Torah, through keeping the mitzvos, which is obviously a very, very straightforward formula. But I think there's something very important in that, because it's the opposite of that saying that I'm spiritual but not religious. Because in Jewish life, there's no such thing as just feeling spiritual, just feeling close to God. Any sense of closeness we have to the Kadosh Baruch Hu comes from the fact that we have faith, that we study Torah, that we practice the mitzvos, that we try to practice the mitzvos. That is what draws us closer to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, as we say in Ashrei every day. Karov Hashem l'chol korav. Hashem is close to those who call upon him. And so if anybody feels distant or wants to know what it means to feel close to Hashem, what it means to feel close to Hashem is to immerse oneself in those things that bring you closer, studying Torah and doing mitzvos. And through that, Vayera Elav Hashem, you will be drawn. You'll feel that connection, that relationship.
I saw a beautiful thought from the Ber Yosef. When the guests come, so Avram says, I want some water taken, and Rachatzu Ragleichem, wash your feet, and then hishanu tachas ha'etz. And we find in other contexts, float, first eat, and then rachatzu raglechem, binu v'rachatzu raglechem. So Rashi has an answer. Why here it was first wash your feet and then come. Ber Yosef suggested maybe because Vayera Elav Hashem, because Hashem had appeared, that turned Avraham's entrance into a place of Ashras HaShechina. That made Avraham's home into a Beis HaMikdash. In a Beis HaMikdash, you have to wash off your feet. In a Beis HaMikdash, you can't have avak shal raglayim. In a Beis HaMikdash, you can't wear shoes. So Avram said, you're coming into my home. So first rachatzu raglechem. Through the Vayera Elav Hashem, his home was a Beis HaMikdash. It was a place of Ashras HaShechina. The first thing is to wash off the feet.
Maybe that's where the rabbis got the inspiration after the Churban to take certain elements of the Beis HaMikdash and put them into the home and make the home this spiritual center. The Shulchan is a Mizbeach. We light candles as a menorah. Our Shabbos meals are korbanos. That's beautiful. All right, shkoch.
Thank you.
Shkoch, thank you.
Your kindness and your care were known far and wide. Father of a nation, your soul is alive. Abraham, are we the children that you dreamed of? Are we that shining star you saw at night? You know it's true, we still call you Avinu. Our Father, our bride, we got your soul inside. Take us home, take us home.